Hello and welcome to All 24 News World News program, coming to you live from Algiers. Your host Islam Said, and to the headlines. Algerian president anticipates new 5-year cooperation plan with Egypt early next year. The two presidents reach consensus on restoring stability in the Middle East. "50 Palestinian martyrs and dozens injured in Zionist massacre in Beit Lahia. Occupation bombing in Jabalia camp and a Shati school leaves numerous martyrs and injured." Also in our news, Algeria calls for an urgent UN Security Council meeting after Zionist attacks on Iran, condemning the Zionist assault on its soil. And in Lebanon, dozens of martyrs and injured in Zionist raids on Sur and Nabatia. Hezbollah reports killing and wounding of occupation forces in border town. The details shortly. Hello again and welcome back to the program. Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboune began a working and fraternal visit to Egypt today, Sunday, followed by a state visit to Oman. According to a statement from the Algerian presidency, the visits aim to strengthen ties of brotherhood, cooperation, and consultation. Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboune announced plans to launch a 5-year cooperation initiative with Egypt early next year, alongside the joint Supreme Committee session in Cairo. He emphasized that relations with Egypt are at their strongest, marked by full mutual understanding.
أبدأ بالعلاقات بين الدولتين. أعتقد أنها على أحسن ما يرام. ما فيه تفاهم تام، فيه رغبة في العمل مع بعض هنا وهناك. علاقاتنا ثنائية. نتمنى فقط أن في بداية 2025 السنة المقبلة إن شاء الله تجتمع اللجنة العليا وتدرس إمكانيات انطلاق كذلك في خماسي جديد تاع علاقات واستثمار وتبادل كل مستويات.
The discussions between myself and His Excellency the President at the level of the two delegations were very positive and, in fact, open up new horizons for cooperation between the two countries. Here in Egypt, Your Excellency, we are delighted with our relationship with you and with Algeria, and we're always ready for further joint work and constructive efforts for the interests of the Egyptian and Algerian peoples.
Algeria and Egypt reaffirmed their strong opposition to forced displacement plans for Palestinians in Gaza Strip. The Algerian and Egyptian presidents called for intensified regional and international efforts to secure an immediate ceasefire, enabling aid to reach Palestinians in the besieged area.
مع أشقائنا في مصر نحاول كيفاش ننقذ الموقف مع المبادرة نتاع أخي فخامة الرئيس السيسي لهدنة تسمح لإدخال كل ما يحتاجوه الغزاويين إلى غزة في انتظار حل نهائي. والحل النهائي ما يكون إلا بالطبع يعني بتسيير فلسطينيين لأراضيهم
فيما يخص غزة تحديدا لأن هي
There is an Arab consensus on the importance of a ceasefire, the entry of aid, and the release of Palestinian hostages and prisoners concerning Gaza. We have been advocating for these measures since the outbreak of the fighting on October 7th last year. In Egypt, we're making significant efforts in this regard, given the immense suffering of our brothers in the Gaza Strip. The Strip has been under siege for nearly 4 months now, so our initiatives with partners and allies aim to stop the violence and facilitate the delivery of humanitarian aid.
Addressing the Libyan crisis, the Algerian and Egyptian presidents emphasized the need for an internal Libyan-led solution to pave the way for a comprehensive election. President Tebboune, speaking alongside President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi at Cairo's Al-Ittihadiyya presidential palace, called the elections a vital step to resolve the crisis and prevent foreign interference.
ليبيا شقيقة، الموقف تاعنا لن يتغير، أن الحل ما يكون إلا ليبي، والحل جذري هو في الانتخابات. الشرعية نتاع الانتخابات هي اللي تخلي من يستفاد من الشرعية من التصويت تاع الشعب الليبي هو اللي قادر يسير ليبيا إلى نفس الموقف.
Our stance on Libya remains the same. We say that the Libyan government is responsible for holding elections and bringing in legitimate leadership, which will be responsible for the Libyan state. We will continue our support and readiness to cooperate for Libya's unity and stability, as this is one of our steadfast principles. We speak about the unity of Libya and land, and emphasize that the solution must be Libyan without interference in Libyan affairs.
On the Sudan crisis, Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune emphasized the need to shield the country from foreign interference, noting that Algeria and Egypt not only engage in regional matters to promote reconciliation.
بالنسبة للسودان تأسف كثير على ما يجري بين الأشقاء. أمور هذه صعبة جدا، لا في الدين تاعنا ولا في الأخلاق تاعنا ولا في احنا ومصر دولتين لن تتدخل أبدا في بين الأشقاء إلا للصلح. ما نغدي لا طرف ولا آخر، لأن الفتنة صعبة، الفتنة أشد من القتل، والناس الذين يفتنون حسابهم عند الله فيما يخص السودان.
Now we move on to recent developments on the ground in Gaza Strip after the break. First off, in our news file, 50 Palestinians were killed and dozens injured in 2 Zionist attacks in Beit Lahia, northern Gaza Strip, according to the Palestinian news agency. The bombings targeted residential areas, prompting ongoing rescue efforts for the missing. In Jabalia camp, 20 Palestinians, including children and women, were killed and dozens were injured in airstrikes on Sunday. Additionally, at least 11 Palestinians were killed and 20 others were injured in a bombing for the Asma school in the Shati refugee camp in Gaza City, with rescue teams still working around the clock to recover those trapped under the rubble.
Israeli warplanes targeted Asma school. This is not the first time that the Israeli occupation has targeted schools. There are large numbers of displaced people from Jabalia and the northern areas of the Gaza Strip. Many martyrs have been transferred to a Shifa hospital, as well as many wounded.
What happened is that people were sitting peacefully, innocent children and elderly people. No one to suspect when suddenly an F-16 destroyed the building on the people and children. There are women and children martyrs. This is a real massacre. The women and children cannot be identified. They were torn to pieces.
The Palestinian Ministry of Health reported that the death toll from the ongoing siege in northern Gaza Strip has reached around 1,000 martyrs. The civil defense recovered a murder and 2 injured from the Abu Sharia family following an Israeli drone strike, with additional casualties from artillery shelling in Saftawi area. The health system is now inoperable due to the 3-week siege. UN Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs Joyce Msuya warned that all residents of northern Gaza Strip face death and urged an end to the occupation's crimes amid worsening conditions from attacks on hospitals and shelters. Meanwhile, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk called the situation in northern Gaza Strip the darkest moment of the conflict, emphasizing threats of bombings, sieges and famine, and urged world leaders to prioritize civilian protection.
Hospitals have been bombed, medical personnel have been detained, shelters have been evacuated and burned, and paramedics have been prevented from rescuing people from the rubble. Families have been separated and men and boys have been taken away, packed into trucks. There is a blatant disregard for humanity by Israeli forces, and what is happening in the besieged area cannot be allowed to continue.
Dozens of displaced people from Jabalia and Beit Lahia gathered around pots of food in Gaza City, seeking meals for their families who fled the northern Gaza Strip. These Palestinians, having survived the bombings, now face the challenge of enduring hunger. Here's Zahra Farjani with the full story.
Children scramble and jostle, and men and women clutching containers push through the crowd, all vying for a share of food handed out by a Singaporean aid group supporting Palestinians. Madallah Abu Zaid, displaced from Jabalia with her family of 10, depends on these distribution for her family's only meal.
They forced us out of our homes. Everything here is so expensive. We rely on food from charitable organizations called Taaliyah, where we get hot meals every day. They have displaced the entire city of Gaza, everyone from Sheikh Radwan to Jabalia.
In Gaza's Yarmouk neighborhood, hundreds of families now live in a tent camp set up on a soccer field after being forced from their homes in Jabalia. Hunger and hardship are constant in these makeshift shelters.
Those who haven't been killed by bombings are starving. This is our life now. We are at Allah's mercy. They should support us and stop this war. How can they just stand by? Innocent people die every day. People who have done nothing wrong.
The UN estimates over 60,000 people have been driven from northern Gaza into Gaza City in recent weeks, now struggling for survival without basic necessities, relying on little more than hope and the goodwill of aid workers.
The government media office in Gaza accused international organizations of serious disregard in their duties, expressing dissatisfaction with their indifference to ongoing Israeli massacres. It said that this lack of interest allows the occupation to continue its brutal crimes against civilians. Additionally, the office reported that the international organizations have failed to facilitate communication for families separated by the war and have not effectively addressed violations against civilians.
International organizations operating in the sector have fallen short in their duties, responded to dangerous conditions with a sense of indifference and detachment. This lack of action encourages the occupation to continue its brutal atrocities against civilians. These organizations have not made the minimum effort required to provide medical support to help hospitals, health facilities, and medical personnel endure and resist the brutal Israeli occupation. They have failed to supply the essential materials and medical supplies needed for this purpose.
The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres renewed his call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza on Sunday. UN spokesperson Stéphane Dujarric stated that Guterres was shocked by the scale of killing and destruction in northern Gaza Strip.
The suffering of Palestinian civilians trapped in northern Gaza is unbearable. The Secretary General is shocked by the levels of killing, injury, and destruction in northern Gaza, where civilians are trapped under the rubble and patients and the wounded are deprived of life-saving health care, while families are left without food and shelter. In the name of humanity, the Secretary General reiterates his call for an immediate ceasefire.
Algeria has called for an urgent UN Security Council meeting on Monday following the Zionist occupation attacks on Iran. Algeria strongly condemned these military actions by the Israeli occupation army and emphasized the international community's responsibility to curb the Israeli escalation throughout the Middle East.
This council must.
Still with the same matter, Iran has requested an emergency UN Security Council meeting to condemn the Israeli occupation attacks on military centers in Tehran and other provinces. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi emphasized Iran's right to respond and warned that the Israeli occupation escalation threatens international peace and security.
There's a need for
This action by the Zionist entity is a blatant violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Islamic Republic of Iran and the principles of international law, including Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the United Nations Charter. This aggressive action continues the series of genocidal crimes in Gaza and the waging of war in Lebanon, posing a serious threat to international peace and security.
Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi accused the United States of actively participating in the recent Zionist attacks on Iran and its surroundings. In a televised statement, he said that Washington provided an air corridor and defensive equipment for the Israeli occupation Air Force, asserting that U.S. fully supports occupying Israel and is complicit in its actions.
America supports the entire Zionist regime and is complicit in its actions, as highlighted in the statement from the government's general staff regarding the operation that took place the night before last one. The involvement of the Americans was evident. They provided an air corridor for the Zionist Air Force and supplied defense equipment beforehand, enabling their participation in this operation.
Our program continues. More news updates on Lebanon will follow shortly after the break. Eleven Lebanese were killed and others injured in Zionist shelling targeting villages in the southern governorates of Nabatea and Sur. The Lebanese Ministry of Health reported 3 martyrs from a raid on Zoutar and 1 in Qaqai al-Jisr in Nabatea. In Sur, rescue teams recovered 5 bodies after an air raid on a Shahabiyya and 2 bodies along with 1 injured person from shelling in Al-Burj al-Shamali. Hezbollah announced that it killed and wounded Israeli occupation soldiers in the town of Hawla on the southern border of Lebanon. In a military statement on Sunday, Hezbollah confirmed it targeted an Israeli infantry unit in the area with a guided missile, resulting in casualties among its soldiers. The Israeli occupation military confirmed that 4 of its officers were killed and 14 others were injured, 3 in critical condition, during a Hezbollah ambush in southern Lebanon. The dead were identified as members of the Alon Brigade, part of the infantry reserve. This brings the total number of occupation soldiers killed since October 7th of last year to 765. Lebanon filed a new complaint with the UN Security Council on Sunday to document Zionist occupation aggression against the country. The Lebanese Foreign Ministry confirmed that its permanent mission to the UN submitted the complaint, urging the international community to act against these attacks. The complaint details the Israeli occupation assaults on Lebanon from October 15th to 24. Survivors of one of the deadliest Zionist strikes recall those who were killed when an airstrike targeted a residential building in Ain Delb, a quiet neighborhood near the Sudan. The attack resulted in over 70 deaths and left dozens injured. Yasin has more.
A dark cloud still hangs over Ain Delb, a small village in southern Lebanon, where families continue to mourn loved ones lost nearly a month ago. It was around 4 p.m. on September 29th when a Zionist airstrike hit a residential building, shattering the village's peace and quiet. Dozens of people were caught in the strike, and the distressing moments were captured on phones, sending shockwaves through the community.
Julia was my black box. She held all my secrets and stories. Though 5 years younger, she was wise beyond her years. I often went to her for advice. She was my shield.
For Ashraf Ramadan and his grandmother, the grief is raw. Standing near the unmarked graves of his mother and sister Julia, inside a cemetery, Ashraf watches his grandmother attempt to stifle her tears, but the loss is overwhelming. Julia had been visiting her grandmother that fateful day, and in a tragic twist, it became her final resting place.
If I had received a warning, I wouldn't have ignored it. Even with all the false alarms, we would have left. Losing my home would have been nothing compared to losing my wife and daughter.
The silence in Ain Delb is heavy, and words fall short. The ruins of hilltop building now hold the last memories of families who once gathered there.
I felt like I was at the edge of the world, forgotten. I shouted, "Deniz, Ali, Nermeen," but there was no response. Our phones would ring, but no one picked up. If someone answered, it would mean they were alive, but no one did, and knew then that they were gone.
This strike, one of the deadliest in Lebanon recently, has left a lasting scar. The rescue operation that followed was relentless, with hundreds working for over 43 hours to reach the victims. Finding families who perished together, a scene tragically similar to the devastation in Gaza. Yet the future remains bleak. The Zionist entity's actions cast a shadow over the hope for peace and stability in Lebanon.
To a different matter now, Governor of the Bank of Algeria, Salah ad-Din Taleb, warned that regional risks from escalating aggression against Palestine and Lebanon have reached unprecedented levels. Speaking at the 5th meeting of the International Monetary and Financial Committee in Washington, he described the situation as unique, with consequences lasting for generations. Taleb stressed that an immediate ceasefire and lasting peace are vital for sustainable global prosperity and a stable economic and social environment for all.
The regional risks stemming from rapid escalation of aggression by the Zionist entity against Palestine and Lebanon have reached an unprecedented level in decades. The scale of humanitarian disaster, characterized by heavy loss of life, human suffering, hunger, disease affecting children, and the mass displacement of populations in Palestine and Lebanon is unparalleled. All wars are tragic, but the tragedy of the aggression against Palestine and Lebanon has a unique and unprecedented nature, and its consequences will be felt for generations to come.
Algeria and Qatar, or Algerian and Qatari companies, signed mutual or multiple partnerships partnership agreements at the first Algerian products exhibition in Qatar. Agreements included a memorandum of understanding between the Ferrovial Group and Shaheen bin Mohammed Lahdan al-Muhannadi Trading Group, and another between the Fendis Furniture and Metal Construction Group and the International Business Council in Qatar. Additionally, EMG SA Pharmaceutical Company partnered with Mohammed bin Mohammed Holding Company in the health sector. The Libyan government of national unity announced that Italian company Eni and British company BP have resumed exploration activities in Libya after a 10-year suspension. Eni, which suspended operations in 2014, returned to explore the Gdamis Basin on Saturday, while BP resumed activities today. The statement also noted that Spanish company Repsol and Austrian company OMV are prepared to restart operations in the Marzouk and Sirte basins in the coming weeks. Syrian Airlines announced it will resume flights between Damascus International Airport and the Jeddah Airport in Saudi Arabia starting November 7th after an 8-year suspension. According to the airline statement reported by Sana'a, there will be 2 flights per week on Mondays and Thursdays. The resumption aims to benefit the community members between the two countries and enhance transportation and communication. More international news in the News in Brief.
Russia announced on Sunday the capture of Izmailovka in Donetsk. The Ministry of Defense stated on Telegram that the town is located on the border with Ukraine. Additionally, the ministry reported shooting down 172 Ukrainian drones and 3 HIMARS missiles over the 24 past hours, along with a French-made Hammer bomb.
The Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced plans for the strict countermeasures to defend its sovereignty in response to the new U.S.-Taiwan arms deal. In a statement, China criticized the $2 billion deal, lodged a formal protest with the U.S., and called for an immediate halt to arms sales to Taiwan, claiming they threaten peace in the Taiwan Strait.
On October 27, Japanese voters will decide Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba's fate amid concerns over the funding scandal and inflation, potentially ending the Liberal Democratic Party's decade-long rule. Nearly 40% cite the economy as their top issue, with 28% wanting tax cuts and 21% seeking wage increases.
Bulgaria's centre-right Gerb party led the parliamentary election on Sunday, but will need a coalition partner to form a government. Meanwhile, the Alpha research poll showed Gerb with 26.4% of the votes, while reformist We Continue the Change came in second with 14.9%.
And lastly, pregnant women in Sudan continue to suffer dire consequences to find suitable healthcare system or healthcare as the conflict in Sudan rages on. Here's Salma Nasib with more.
Millions have been displaced, essential services are ground to a halt, and the health of countless Sudanese, especially pregnant women, is hanging by a thread. The conflict in Sudan, which erupted on April 15, 2023, has plunged the country into a devastating humanitarian crisis. Take Huda Dawood, for instance. At 9 months pregnant, she fled Sinjar 2 months ago, heading to Port Sudan in search of medical care for a safe delivery.
As a pregnant woman, safety and healthcare are my top priorities. We need proper nutrition for ourselves and our babies. That's why I made the tough decision to leave Sinja when the RSF took control and traveled all the way to Port Sudan. The situation here isn't perfect, but it's definitely better than in the conflict zones where there's no functioning hospital.
But not everyone is as courageous as Huda. Besides, with road and safe and essential services crippled, many women are forced to give birth at home, relying on traditional methods.
The number of women coming to us has skyrocketed. Many can't afford the high cost of hospitals, and they're arriving from remote areas in extremely vulnerable conditions. Most of the pregnant women I see are displaced and malnourished, so they need a lot more care and attention, just like their newborns.
Experts warn that maternal mortality rates during childbirth could soar by 15% due to the ongoing military clashes, with a staggering 80% of hospitals and health centers across the country out of commission.
The escalation of the conflict has not only devastated the health system, but also led to a significant loss of vital data on women. There's a serious lack of maternity care and treatment for chronic diseases that many women face. These issues call for a range of interventions and operations that are stretching our already fragile health system to its limits.
According to the United Nations, over 1.2 million pregnant and breastfeeding women lack access to healthcare, facing dire living conditions and malnutrition that put both their lives and their children at risk.
That wraps up our news program for tonight, dear viewers. You can always check our social media platforms for more updates from me and the rest of the team of All 24 News. Thank you for watching and take care.